Всем привет! С вами Александр Шлык, и я разговариваю сейчас с вами из Флориды, из города Форт Лодердейл. Это подкаст «Кого, где и как», и мы продолжаем говорить о том, почему выборы все еще дают надежду. Я здесь, потому что в этом городе сейчас собрались люди со всех Соединенных Штатов Америки, которые занимаются организацией выборов. И у нас замечательная возможность сделать дополнительный эпизод в нашем первом сезоне, 11-й эпизод про выборы в Соединенных Штатах Америки. Не выключайтесь, вспоминайте английский, перевода не будет, но я надеюсь, что вам будет очень и очень интересно. So, my first guest is the current chairperson of the Electoral Assistance Commission, Donald Palmer, and it's a very interesting setting. Back in Europe, especially in Eastern and Central Europe, we tend to think of an election being a very centralized affair. You would have either a ministry or a central election commission running the whole show nationwide, recruiting people for the lower level commissions, organizing everything, and being ultimately responsible for everything. That's obviously not the case here in the US, is it?
No, it's not. We're made up the United States, and we're the Election Assistance Commission that was created by the federal government, the Congress, to really assist the states in the administration of their elections. And so you'll have each state, which have their chief election official that may be a secretary of state or a secretary of a state board. They're going to be responsible for publishing the final results and certifying their state elections. It's the same with the territories. And so we play an assistance role in the testing and certification of voting systems, setting those minimal standards of security accuracy. After Bush v. Gore and the...
Oh, we do recall that time.
You do?
I was glued to the radio following the recounts, and that was fascinating. Maybe that's what got me hooked on elections.
It probably was. It got a lot of us hooked on elections. But the Congress in America passed the Help America Vote Act, which created the Election Assistance Commission, and it gave us those minimal duties, as well as they wanted to report to Congress any federal monies that go to the states will go through the EAC through grants. And there were some best practices in clearinghouse that they wanted the EAC to sort of play as the middleman, is to provide that assistance to the states and to localities across the country.
Right. My very good friend Paul DeGregorio was the first chairperson of the EAC, and in some ways he's my godfather in the world of elections.
Absolutely. And we know Paul, he served on the EAC, and he continues to be involved in elections across the country.
Absolutely. So you mentioned the minimal standards. In a way, you do create them. It's an advisory function. It's an assistance function. How difficult is it to convince the states that they actually, or the jurisdictions, counties even, that they need to stick to those minimal standards?
Well, it is minimal standards. They're voluntary, of course. The reality of it is that we accredit voting labs that will do a majority of the testing. States want to have some flexibility. So if they want to test for additional measures, I think they want to have the confidence, and so do the voters, that there's a minimal level of testing that's going on. And then the state is going to review that and say, do we want to do additional testing and review? And so that's really how a lot of states will approach the issue. Many will just take the EAC. Some will use our labs in conjunction with our certification program. But the way the Congress set it up was to be maximum flexibility to the states. And as you know, as you see America, we're very decentralized, and states will use our certification program in a number of different ways.
Right. It's a fascinating thing in the United States, how decentralized and diverse are the methods of running elections. Back when I was observing elections in the US, I was overseeing and clearing the final reports on the election. And that was probably one of the most challenging reports to produce. You have to produce one report on thousands of different ways to elect, say, a president of the United States. This decentralization and this diversity, is it a challenge, or is this something that underpins the strengths of the elections in the US?
It is definitely a challenge. It's a challenge even at the state level. I served in Virginia and Florida as the director of elections, as the chief election official. And it is a challenge because you sort of want everything done in a uniform way, but that's not even within a state. It's not uniform because you have large counties and small counties.
And sometimes it's municipalities that are actually running the show, right?
Absolutely. So
Connecticut, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. And folks may do things slightly different as long as it's in compliance with the law. And so It is definitely a challenge, but some would argue that it's been part of the way the United States has done elections for 2 centuries, and we're not about to really change. And it is a strength because there is a certain level of security. Let's say you figure out here in Fort Lauderdale how you're going to try to hack the system or maybe sort of commit some sort of fraud. It's going to be hard to duplicate that in the other counties or the other states. So you may figure out how to take down a municipality's server, but you've got 8,000 more jurisdictions across the country before you even get started to make an impact. And so obviously we're sensitive to, we want to make sure that even the least protected is up to snuff, right? To have the latest security. But you see, the point is that it is a strength, but it is definitely a challenge, particularly from my view. As a lawyer, we want to make sure everyone's following the laws and being done uniformly. But just like Americans like different types of cars, they like to run their elections differently as well.
Absolutely. This is a unique feature of this country. How not only federal, but highly decentralized you are, and how people value the diversity that you have in this country. People love living their own way of life across the country.
We do have an independent streak in this country. Working in the federal government, look, I think we have it's the right approach. We're there to assist and to help and facilitate election administration. We're not there to tell every county and every locality how exactly to do it or a state. We're there to help. And so that's the sort of the approach we take is how can we help you?
And let's get back to the methods of voting. U.S. uses a lot of election technology for voter registration, voter identification, for ballots, for casting ballots, for counting, for tabulating. It's a huge diversity of these machines. Do you feel that there is some sort of unification in these technologies, or is it going more in very different directions?
Well, we do have different modes of voting, but I think from a technology perspective, we at the AC, we're trying to reduce the significant growth of, like, let's say, electronic poll books or voting systems. Like we talked earlier about how different states will want to do different reviews and testing of voting machines. Well, we want to make sure that the fundamentals are taking place at these labs. And also we want to make sure that if other election systems that are tied to the internet, let's say electronic poll books or voter registration systems, that those are also tested to standards. And so we just want to make sure that that's at core of testing, and then states can do and have the benefit of knowing that these systems that they're using across America have been tested in labs to the best security standards available.
So given that you've been using technology for casting ballots, for counting, for dozens of years, and this technology has obviously evolved. You've recalled 2000 Bush Gore and the punch cards and everything. I mean, that's in a way an old technology compared to what we hear about and see around in the United States now. Is internet voting on a horizon?
I don't think so. It's just not on the horizon. We in America have been focused very much on making sure there's a paper ballot involved in the process. And that is where the politics is going. It's where the security researchers that look at our systems, they are saying, there's so many reasons that you have to have a paper ballot, not just so you can do audits, but also during recounts. I don't think we're going to get to internet voting. There may be a small slice of the community that deals with transmission of ballots to and from. Like, as you know, America has a law called the MOVE Act, which allows for transmission of blank ballots,
right,
to overseas citizens or to voters with disabilities. And so there is some movement to allow the return of ballots in using different technologies, but it's not a formal internet voting. I think we're at least a decade away from really even readdressing that issue.
Right. Yeah, it's also the phenomenon in Europe these days. Several countries have been testing internet voting solutions. I mean, Estonia has impacted the thinking big time, and then Norway was testing, Switzerland. And in many of those places, they really went back to paper ballots.
Well, as you know, cybersecurity has become such a big issue because, unfortunately, there are bad actors that want to sort of interfere and, they want to intrude on the election administration process. And because of those security concerns and the fact that there are bad actors that want to exploit that, we just have to make sure that that's really not on the table, that you can attempt to exploit and sort of disrupt an election, but we're going to make sure that we have processes in place to limit the damage to confidence in elections. So I think that because of where we are in this environment, again, we're just not going to have internet voting anytime soon.
Right. It's I agree with you. It's much easier to maintain the confidence and trust when the people actually see the physical ballots and when there's a chance for recount, when there's accountability of those.
And one of the things I love about when I visit foreign countries in Europe and other places, you often see the transparent ballot box.
Exactly.
So that's not something we have in America. We usually have ballot boxes, but they're not transparent. I really love to have those, bring those to America. So we have that ability to take that selfie or take that picture of us casting a ballot in a transparent ballot box.
Exactly. Well, it plays those ways back in some of the countries that are far from democracy. Every once in a while, you'd walk into a polling station as an election observer and you would see clumps of ballots. And these people will brag about transparency and the transparent ballot boxes, but it makes fraud transparent as well very often. So speaking of confidence and trust in the elections, I mean, everywhere in the world, America is no exception. We live in the highly polarizing times. Yeah, there's a lot of politics back in the elections. We all loved the time when it was pure technical administrative exercise and politics was just the output of it. Now, how do you work to maintain or hopefully even increase the trust in the elections?
Well, I think that part of increasing trust is being able to articulate how the voting process works for the voter, how the voting systems will take a ballot that will be tabulated and counted and results will be provided. So it makes it more difficult. Not only do you have to administer the election, but now you have to be able to be a public relations expert. You got to be able to talk about it. You got to be able to talk about the security of the machines. And some of this can, as you mentioned, it can be very technical. And I'm a political science major. I'm not an engineer. So I have to try to get as smart as possible to describe the standards that are being developed and the labs that are testing for that and how the folks at the Election Assistance Commission, how we can assist the states in maintaining the security. So that's a lot to be able to explain to 300 million people in America that are eligible to vote. It's almost impossible. And so because we in the government, we only have a small ability to talk about these issues. So it can be difficult to explain to voters exactly how the system is secure.
Yeah, it also could be quite difficult for election administrators when they have bipartisan leadership in the commissions at different jurisdiction levels. And including for yourself, the Election Assistance Commission is 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. I can imagine how hard it could be sometimes to reach decisions.
On some issues, it can be hard, but I think particularly at the local level, I've seen it when I worked in the state, is that you've still got to make a decision. You have to work together to find a common ground. And so
the voters won't be happy if you don't have decisions.
Exactly. And so, at the Election Assistance Commission, we have 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans that are nominated by the congressional leaders to the president. In most states, you're going to have bipartisan panels. You're going to have 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. And so they have to make decisions together and you can voice your opinion. But again, as you said, the election must go on. Decisions must be made. So there has to be give and take. And so, but both parties are then aware that, my interests are being represented, that, that there are multiple sets of eyes are looking at the results and with an interest in making sure that it's a free and fair election.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's quite a typical model in countries in transition when they would put the opposition and the governing side into the election commissions. Comes with benefits, comes with certain difficulties in taking decisions, a bit of political polarization in the commission's work. But yeah, that's not uncommon. So in this regard, the U.S. is actually quite similar to many other places. Thank you very much. And this podcast one-liner is we're talking about elections and why elections still give us hope. One last question. Why do you think elections still give us hope?
Well, elections and election officials really are holding the line. You mentioned polarization and controversy. There may be a lot of changes going on in society and in our governments. Election officials are those individuals who care the most that there's a process where everybody can participate and cast their vote. And so election officials are holding the line to make sure that democracy is realized by the voter and by the population. And so we're there for one purpose, to make sure that not only does this election run, but there is a next election.
Thank you very much, and good luck in your super important work. It's such a pleasure and honor to speak to you. And to our listeners, stay tuned. We will be right back with people running the elections from all around the United States of America. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
My next guests are Eric Fay and Brianna Lennon. One thing that I have to highlight from the outset, these guys are the reason and the inspiration for why this podcast actually exists. I've been a guest on their show. You will see the link in the description to this podcast. Click on it, get subscribed, but beware, elections is a highly addictive subject. You get hooked on that very, very quickly. So, Brianna and Eric come from the state of Missouri. Where is Missouri? I'm not so sure our folks would be able to pinpoint that on a map of the United States.
First of all, Privyet, Alex. Thank you for having us. So Missouri is right in the middle of the United States. It's probably most famous for being where the Missouri and Mississippi River join together. It's right in the
That's
middle.
around where Tom Sawyer was?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, that's a good reference for us. We've all read Tom Sawyer in childhood. That's one of the most popular books from the U.S. We've just spoken to the chairman of the Election Assistance Commission, and we've touched upon how diverse is the way in which elections are run around the United States. So you work in two different counties, St. Louis and Boone County. You're not, by American standards, you're not too far away from each other. But how different are the ways in which you run elections, considering you're even in the same state and not too far away?
Yeah, I think there's two big differences. One is that structurally, we're very different. Eric has a board that I don't have. I'm an elected county clerk. But we do the same job when it comes to elections, even though the structure of the office is the same. And then the size is just very different. So I only have, our voter population is about 125,000 people, and Eric's is obviously much larger. So it comes with its own set of differences. But I think the biggest thing is that the way that Missouri law is structured for elections, we both have the discretion to run our elections the way that we need to within the framework of the law, which is pretty broad. I mean, we have a lot of, like I said, we have a lot of discretion when it comes to what time our offices are open, how accessible we want to be to the public in terms of like being open on the weekends, whether we go out to community events, and all those different things are all really different depending on what county you're in.
Do you at least use the same technology for casting ballots and counting ballots?
No.
And you're only 200 kilometers away from each other.
Yeah.
That's right, yeah. So to your point, the administration of elections in the United States is extremely decentralized. I think people have to remember that. And to one point, Brianna mentioned briefly that I think is important to reemphasize for folks in other countries is that the majority of election officials in the United States are elected themselves. So in the United States, we have a lot of examples where the election official is also on the ballot and being voted for, and they're counting.
So counterintuitive for us.
Yeah, that's very counterintuitive. And a professor that we had on this podcast once gave us a great anecdote that the United States had democracy before bureaucracy. So the only concept we have of how to have people run administrative things is to elect them, because the concept of bureaucracy did not exist in the 18th century, really.
Right.
So,
you broke away from, the monarchy early enough to start electing, to have to elect your people. Back in the administrative regimes in the ancient, 19th century Europe, you'd get people appointed from the top to the bottom, yeah? And until now, elections, in some countries, elections are run by government ministries, which is also a bit counterintuitive for us because the government ministry would, be representing the ruling coalition or a majority party. So that's also, a big debate in Europe on that. But how difficult is it to run an election while you're running in the election?
So, I think, and I don't know how many studies there have been on this, but I think one of the things to note about even being an elected county clerk is that there are a lot of times where you're running unopposed. So
it's not like there's a long queue of people wishing for that job, right?
Not really, no. In some larger jurisdictions, I think that's definitely the case. In a lot of the contentious areas that have seen, either an issue happened with an election or there was some reason to have a change in who is leading that office, then there probably is a lot more when it comes to running. But the concept of having to have like a really hard fought election, I think doesn't happen that often when it comes to county clerk offices, especially in Missouri. But I have had to run an election while my name was on the ballot. And it doesn't feel great. I wish that there was a way to do it.
Pressure.
Yeah, I wish that there was a way to do it where that wasn't the case. But even at the state level, we have secretaries of state in a lot of our states that are elected, and they are overseeing the entirety of the election. And even though they are not the ones that are doing the hands-on work because that's left to the local election officials, they are still, at the end of the day, certifying what those results are for themselves.
And there were cases when the secretaries of state would be running for, say, position of governor while overseeing that very election.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think at the state level, that's where you see a lot more political activity because you'll have a secretary of state that will endorse another candidate. They'll endorse a ballot issue that's on the ballot. And so then it goes even beyond their own election, but what influence they have over other elections as well.
Oh, yeah, I do remember how interesting that was to write reports on the U.S. elections, specifically on those cases where you have to be, as election observers internationally, you have to be, approaching things in exactly the same manner no matter which country you're observing in, and at the same time trying to, pay respect to the context and the tradition that you have of doing these things. But, times are a bit different now in terms of elections. Yeah, you take a look at the news and there's quite a bit of polarization around election issues. Yeah. What do you do to maintain and maybe even build up the trust of the people in the election procedures?
This is a very important point because I think prior to 2020, and really, if you talk to election administrators that were doing this job in the 1980s and 1990s, it was really a behind the scenes kind of civil servant that was just making the donuts, to make the election work, as they might say. And now, thrust into the limelight, election administrators in the United States have had to take a different tact and be more proactive in their communication with the public, with voters.
Hence your podcast.
Hence the podcast. There you go. One thing that I enjoy the most, something we've really started doing since 2016, really, but 2020 especially, and something it's been proven to be effective, is giving tours of our election office. And again, this might be something a little bit different for a European audience. In the United States, our ballots are very long. People are voting for 20, 30, 40 things on a ballot. When you have a ballot that long, it requires a lot of technology and equipment. So we have all these voting machines, electronic poll books. An election office in a large jurisdiction in the United States has tens of thousands of square feet of warehouse with all these things in it. And so bring the public through there and showing all the testing protocols, the security protocols, how voter registration is undertaken. Voter registration is active in the United States. It's not passive like many European countries. So voters have to come to the election office and register themselves. How that works, what is the security and integrity around that process. So showing citizens, showing voters, also showing elected officials how the process works. A lot of elected officials don't realize either. So
yeah, there's a big difference between running an election and running in an election.
Exactly right.
I always compare it to, these frequent flyers. The fact that you have like a golden status for a frequent flyer doesn't actually mean you know how to run a plane, right? Anything to add, Brianna?
Yeah, so I would just add, there's also the concept of transparency that's built into a lot of our system, but is not well known. And a lot of the work that we've been doing has been to showcase the fact that things that people have concerns about have always been open to them to question, to learn about, to see how the process works. When we are doing testing on things in an active election, that's a key point too, is that our offices are there all the time. We are not spun up just because an election is going to happen. We exist as an elections administrative office full time throughout the year. So there's always an opportunity for people to learn about it, but it also gives us the time and resources to put together better ways to educate people on it. But when people come in and they want to see that we have voting equipment that's counting ballots accurately, that there's not fraud that is affecting the ballots or the voters, and that we're doing everything with bipartisanship and with integrity, lots of times people are surprised. They think that we are going out of our way to show them this instead of that already being built into the way that our democracy is. So I think sometimes just reminding people that they have the ability, and in some cases maybe even a responsibility, to come into our office and see how elections work and be a part of it. They can be a poll worker. They can work at the polling places on election day, and they can learn more about it. That reminder is just as important.
Speaking of poll workers, how difficult is it to recruit people to serve on polling stations?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. And that no, it really is so hard. And I remember that from when we were doing our interviews when we were in Moldova and in Hungary and talking to people, is that's like the great unifier, is it is so hard to find people to work at polling places.
Except in Belarus.
Well, in Belarus, people don't get an option to say no, right? It's not I wouldn't call it a civic duty. It's your life preservation in a way.
Yeah. That was one thing I was a little bit envious of the Belarusian election administration, is that, yes, they have these assigned poll workers.
Well, they pre-assign a lot of things, including the results. We can be pretty open about that. Maybe one question on the technology that you're using. U.S. has been using technology for elections for dozens of years. I mean, back in 2000, we were all glued to the radios, figuring out what these hanging chads are. And, it was an eye-opener for us. Maybe that's what got me hooked on elections. I don't know. I was 16 back then. But technology evolves quickly. How often do you upgrade your technological solutions? Because that's quite resource intensive. You mentioned the gigantic warehouses. That probably costs a lot of money. So you probably don't have a chance to upgrade for every single new model that is out there.
It is, and it's a highly regulated environment for election voting machines that actually scan ballots, tabulate ballots. Every state has different regulations on this topic, but in our case, the technology, the hardware and software, has to be certified by an independent voting system testing laboratory and then certified by the Missouri Secretary of State's office before the counties can purchase it. There are only 4 companies authorized to sell that type of equipment in Missouri. Brianna and I have different brands of voting equipment, even though we're in the same state. But because there is such a regulated testing and certification process, there are not constant upgrades like you have on your phone, for instance, that you get upgrades constantly from your provider. And every upgrade costs money to buy it. So we've had our current voting system since 2019. I think we've had 4 upgrades in that time.
Right. So it's not that infrequently. It's okay. But apart from these certification laboratories, do you also have some degree of public scrutiny over that? Like something that we would call civil society? Many people back at home would think, U.S. is such a well-established democracy. Civil society has there's no need for it to exist in how we understand it as a public control function. Do you have that? Do you have civil society organizations that, are interested in the election topics?
Yeah, I think that it is highly dependent on what part of the country you're in and probably how large your jurisdiction is. In a smaller area, you're not really going to have that kind of infrastructure. But there are certainly organizations and advocacy groups that are interested in technology and put a lot of thought into providing feedback. I think even the certification processes that Eric was talking about, stakeholders are involved in those conversations through the development of a lot of that technology too. So you have a kind of an ecosystem of elections administrators, technology providers, and the general public and civil society that talk about what kind of technology would be good for everybody that voters can use. Accessibility is a huge issue, and that comes up a lot when we're talking about technology. The other thing I wanted to add about the adoption of technology, and one of the things that I think is unique because of our roles and them being full-time roles and us having very like set election dates and a long lead up time to them is that it gives us the ability to vet out that technology and introduce it to people, sometimes rolled out slowly in pilot environments so that you don't just wholesale change everything. And that's not necessarily true in a lot of other countries where, you get a small amount of time, maybe a couple months to know that an election's going to happen. I don't know how you would be able to incorporate technology that quickly in an effective way unless you had already kind of pre-sold everybody on the idea that this was a really important thing that we needed to do and got everybody kind of prepared. Like your glue example, as long as you're having conversations and letting people know this is why we're doing these updates and we need to incorporate this technology, even if it doesn't work perfectly the first time, we're working towards perfection.
Right. No, in a lot of countries in Europe, there has been a lot of testing of technological solutions for casting ballots, counting ballots, tabulation. And in a lot of places, countries decided to go back on that. They were like, all right, we tested, including internet voting solutions. Yeah, Norway, Switzerland, they've tested and they've decided there's still better to do pen and paper and not even the scanners, hand counting. And that speaks volumes about, also the levels of trust and confidence that people are showing in the elections worldwide. It's not, U.S. is no exception in this regard.
It's not just technology for ballot counting, though. I mean, if you're at this conference here in Florida, and there are a multitude of vendors here showing which type of equipment and technology they have. Several are there with just mail sorting machines. I was in Sweden in 2022 for their parliamentary elections, and they have a relatively large number of postal ballots or ballots that need to be transmitted from one area of the country to another. If you're in Stockholm, but you live in Gothenburg, you can turn your ballot in, but it needs to be sent back to Gothenburg. And they were doing it all manually. And I said to the election director in Gothenburg, you need a mail sorting machine to, sort this all out. So as the complexity increases, because we're here in Florida, the administrator has to run 3 separate kinds of elections. They have, of course, in-person voting on election day. They also have, for a period of days or weeks, early voting where people can come vote early. And then they also have probably a third of their voters are voting by mail, postal voting. So they have to have planning and technology for all these different things. And it's not just technology for casting ballots.
Right. Well, thanks a lot. As a one-liner in this podcast is that we're talking about elections and why elections still give us hope. Why do elections still give us hope?
That question's a little tough in the current environment. I love election administration. And what gives me hope continually is that despite all the rhetoric you see in the media, what politicians might say on the campaign trail, when you are actually in polling stations, and at least in our context, half of the workers in the polling station are of one political party and the other half are of an opposite political party. They are working together to make the system work for all the voters. The voters there are generally in a good spirit, trying to help each other out, make it through the process. It's an uplifting experience. It's an experience that the vast majority of citizens don't have the opportunity to observe or participate in. But that's why I always try to remind people and encourage them, sign up to be a poll worker because it will give you hope for democracy.
This may be just because we're coming off of our own. We had our state association meeting, and in most states and in Missouri, every election official is part of a statewide association. And I think what gives me hope is that not just a pledge where you're really seeing, I think, like the best of the best and the innovations and things like that, the everyday work that's being done and the people that are doing it are all coming together for the right reasons. So I have never talked to another local election official that thought that there was no hope left in the process, that, we should just throw in the towel and that it's too hard to run elections in this environment. Everybody is looking for a way to make sure their community's voice is heard. Everybody knows that voting is the way to make sure that your voice is heard in our democracy. And I get hope from the people that are doing the work every day, whether it's our staff or whether it's other local election officials that are showing up every day and still getting things done and making our elections run smoothly.
Thank you very much for being with us. I'm sure our audience will appreciate you taking the time.
Большое спасибо, Alex.
Thank you very much, Eric. Thank you, Brianna. Сейчас у меня в гостях Bill Burgess, State of Oregon. And guys, switch to English, recall your English skills. This is a good practice for you to recollect your English. So Bill, thanks so much for taking the time. Where do you come
Well,
from?
thanks for having me, Alex. I come from Salem, Oregon is where I'm living now. I grew up in Los Angeles and Orange County, California. Went to Oregon State for college. And so I stayed in Oregon after that, never went back other than to visit.
So Oregon is just up from California, right?
Yes, it's a state north of California, and on the way to the Canadian border, there's another state in between, which is Washington. I live in the northern part of the state on something called I-5, which is the highway that goes from Mexico to Canada, and we're in the Willamette Valley. The Willamette Valley is one of the most fertile growing valleys in the world. We understand that grows quite a number of different types of crops. We also have forest land. So the wood products industry is or used to be good in Oregon. We also have what we call the Silicon Forest in Washington County, but throughout the Willamette Valley, actually.
Right. That's a big IT industry, right?
Yes.
Will be interesting for our folks because I'm sure Belarus has a big IT industry, or should I say used to have before a lot of people left the country. And many of our IT professionals are actually in your state, probably working with big IT companies.
Well, I'm glad to have them, and I hope they find a good life and a good energetic type of situation for them there in Oregon, and until they get a chance to go back to their home countries. They're welcome to stay with us.
I might settle and become your voters.
Yes.
How many voters do you administer in your jurisdiction?
My jurisdiction has about 250,000 voters. Actually, it's 229,000 voters, a little over that, as of today, that are active voters. We also have inactive voters on our list, another 40,000 of those. But those are the people that have not voted for a while.
Just a bit closer.
Okay.
Yeah, super. And state of Oregon is quite a unique state in terms of how you run your elections. Can you tell me more about that?
Oh, yes. We've been vote by mail since 2000. That's 2000. The citizens passed an initiative in 1998 wanting to go all vote by mail. Since the 80s, we've done some vote by mail for local elections, and then people decided that they just wanted it that way for everybody. And it's been a big help. Number one, it makes it much easier to administer an election. We don't have all the polling places and all. And nowadays you need all the security and accessibility issues around each polling place. We used to use schools and churches, and now it's hard to get permission to use those particular places for polling. Plus, we would have to hire so many more people than we do with vote by mail. Vote by mail also makes it easier for our voters that are older, that can't stand in line very long, or that have disabilities, or even that busy mother that can't get off to get to work. I mean, from work and home and kids and everything to get to the polling place besides. Or I was just talking with a person who works on Tesla charging stations, and he says, Bill, and this is in Montana, not Oregon, but they also offer vote by mail there. And he says, I'm all over the state. I don't know where I'm going to be on election day. So vote by mail is handy for me.
So it's interesting that it was a citizen initiative to go all vote by mail. It wasn't brought in by election folks as a sort of a convenience measure. The people wanted it.
Yes, there were, because they had enough practice with it, because before they were able to say that they wanted vote by mail for themselves, sign up for what we call absentee balloting, which most states still offer absentee balloting. But they decided they wanted both the parties wanted it at one time but didn't want it at another time. So neither party would get together just where they would both want it at the same time, because they always wanted whatever got them in power at the time.
Right.
They didn't want any changes. And so the people got fed up with it. Also, the county clerks got involved, as well as the League of Women Voters, and said, hey, we really need to bring this to the people.
It's interesting how, there is a feature of a democracy, including in how democracy functions.
Yeah.
It's very interesting. You mail out the packages with the ballots to the people, which basically means that you have to keep really good track of where they are. They have to proactively register, probably, give you their addresses, and then they get the packages, right? What happens next?
Well, once they get the package by mail, they can either bring it to our office if they want. They can take it to a ballot
Just drop
box.
locations, yeah.
We have about 24 ballot drop locations in Marion County. Or they can mail it in. Less than half of them that respond mail it in. More of them will use the drop boxes or come to our office. So if you like to do it the old-fashioned way and come in, and we have the voting booths, if they want to vote in the voting booths, they can either bring their ballot with them, or if they want to get a new ballot when they get there, we'll give them a new ballot. The security is on the envelope outside of the ballot, and there's a unique number on each of those. So as soon as we issue them a new one, we kill the other one. So if the other one were to come in, it wouldn't be counted. It would be set aside for investigation.
Right. So even in this method, there's quite a bit of flexibility for people.
Yes.
So it's not all prescribed. You get your ballot in the mail, you vote at home, and then you package it and send it back. So the flexibility actually is helpful, probably, to increase the turnout.
Oh, yes, I think so. And the interesting thing, sometimes when we look at a ballot that comes back, it'll have a couple different colors of ink or shades of ink on it, showing that voter voted part of it one time, maybe thought about it, went back to it, and voted more the second time. So we think you can vote a more considered ballot this way. Also, our county sends out a voter's pamphlet, and the state sends out a voter's pamphlet, so that people have information to read about each candidate that wants to be in the voter's pamphlet, or each initiative or issue that's in there.
Right.
So, and then, of course, they can get all their other sources that they want to, too. But
How
voting
far-
at home, sometimes they end up with a little bit of coffee on their ballot, or a little bit of
Normal life.
breakfast,
Yeah. Normal life. You saw that there was actually a voter there with a coffee mug. But how far in advance before the election do you mail these materials, and how far before the election can they actually start returning them?
Okay, military and overseas, we send out 45 days ahead. Out of state, we send out 29 days ahead. And in state, we send out 21 days ahead. So
It's 3 weeks before the election day.
yes, that gives it much time to get there, even if the Postal Service takes a week or more to get it there.
Right,
Yeah.
right. Well, they could be in a rural location somewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. But I appreciate the flexibility that it gives to the people, and the accessibility that is only increased with this for people with disabilities, for people who have to be at work, providing for their families. But considering that you have to return your ballot quite a number of days before the election day, and we all know we follow the U.S. politics, whether we'll want or not, it's upon us through all news channels worldwide. The campaign is going on until the last moment. What do you think of that? Can they make a fully informed choice? And isn't there a risk that they might want to change their opinion?
Well, I hope so. There's always that last minute thing that can happen. But, campaigns in America last so long. These candidates registered to be a candidate like 9 months ahead of time sometimes. Like this particular election, the May election that we're having coming up for a primary election, campaign filing has already started to take place, and we've already got candidates now getting ready for the ballot for the middle of May.
Plenty of time to make an opinion of them.
Yeah, so hopefully that there's enough out there. That is a risk, of course, and that's why some people wait till the last minute. And if they want to do that, they can. Just make sure they get it into our office by 8 or get it postmarked by 8, and then we can take it within a week after if it comes through the Postal Service.
Right.
But I really don't recommend that. I recommend using a ballot drop box, especially in those last few days, or just bringing it to our office.
Right. And once you get those ballots in the envelopes, how do you process them? How do you count them? Is this a hand count or do you feed them into machines?
Well, that's very interesting. They come in an envelope that's got the unique number on it, and we can tell whether or not that unique number is still active, plus the person's name and their signature. We're taking a picture of all that on the envelope as it goes through the envelope sorter. We do signature checking. We only open envelopes that have a signature on them that we can match and say that it's more likely the voter than it's not the voter.
The standard is likelihood, yeah?
Mhm.
Probability.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a 100%. We don't have like forensic signature checkers that can spend days on a signature. We got to do this in seconds. And so we do have an out, though. If indeed the signature doesn't seem to be good, we are going to send them a letter and give them up to 21 days after the election to respond. And if they respond affirmatively with a new signature and that new signature matches, then we will count their ballot. But otherwise we won't. And we'll send them a letter either way, letting them know. Well, we'll send them a letter first, telling them that they've got the choice. And then once they vote, then they may find that their ballot is not good, because we can also look and see household, and sometimes we can see another family member sign the ballot, and we can't.
That's
do that.
that's a no-go.
Yeah, that's a no-go, and they get a nasty letter from me about a possible felony.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But that also means that on the tail end of the process, including after the election day, you might not be able to have the full final results.
That's true.
Is that an issue, especially if you have a close election or a close vote on an initiative?
Well, it is for some, but democracy requires that we go through these procedures, and if it's a real close race, that's all right. It's going to take a long time. Generally, we know there's a big enough margin on election night or a couple days afterward to know who the winner is likely to be, or if there's a chance of a challenger still winning. But there are those cases where we'll have a close race, and then we'll have to wait that 21 days before I can certify the race. After that, if the race is still really close, we're going to do a recount. We're going to do a hand recount of that race. And the hand recount might or might not be as accurate as the machines, but at least and we do that in public too. So that's a way for the public to see how that vote went for those people.
Right. But in this climate of polarization, of doubts of the election integrity, we hear that. We see that in the news. There's a lot of discussion on that all across the country. The fact that you can't provide final results, isn't that an opening for the election doubters to cast shadow on the otherwise good process?
Well, yes, but there's an opening for the election doubters. No matter what the rules are, they're going to find a way to challenge things as baseless as that may be. But if people understand our procedures and understand why we do what we do, which I'm glad to explain to anybody. In fact, you can go to my website, www.co.marion.or.us/CO, and hit elections on that, and we have a YouTube video that explains exactly the steps that we go through when a ballot comes to us, all the steps in there, and they can look at that. And then if they've got any questions, I love them to either call me or call my office or come see us. I know your audience is around the world, but they can certainly come as long as they can get a visa or whatever.
Folks, don't worry. If you didn't catch that URL, we will paste it in the description of this episode. So please go visit, because this is one of the interesting examples of how the election officials make sure that their clients, the people, actually get the full details. It's fascinating and interesting. Last question to you. Was this climate of polarization, this election doubting, we keep hearing that, people doubt whether elections lead to the good outcomes. What matters to them is, they're not election nerds. They're not geeks. The process is interesting to us. What matters for most of the people is the outcome. And this one podcast one-liner this is a podcast about why elections still give us hope. In your opinion, why do the elections still give us hope?
My goodness. I'm glad that that's your one-liner, because they do. They give us hope here in America. If we make a mistake as a public, we get a chance to rectify it. If we need to change directions, we have a chance to rectify it if people participate. There are folks out there that want to discourage people from participating with some of that misinformation, but people need to be strong, and if they're going to make democracy work, they got to participate. And hopefully our democracy will be a light to the world, that everybody, because everybody was born with inalienable rights and to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And part of that means having self-direction, have a government that is responsive to you as a citizen. And so that's where we want to be sure that everybody has hope in voting and making the world a better place, not just for ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren. We got to think a couple generations ahead than just ourselves. And that means we're willing to go through the pain ourselves to get things done for the next generation.
Well, thank you, Bill. This is very impressive and very interesting. I appreciate you taking the time, and good luck with the very important work you're doing for your country.
Thank you very much, Alex. Appreciate it.
And my next guest is Julie Marcus, who is the Pinellas County Supervisor of Elections in Florida. So nice for you to find time for us.
Thank you, Alexander. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
You run elections in Pinellas County, Florida. Where is Pinellas County?
Where are
We kind of know where Florida is, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We're the peninsula of the continental United States, and Pinellas County is the peninsula of Florida. So we're on the Gulf side, and we're basically in the middle. So if you were to go from Orlando and go west, that's about where
south from Tampa.
We're actually
People kind of know Tampa because of sport.
So think of Tampa. Now you're going to cross a body of water, which is Tampa Bay, and Pinellas County is across the water.
Got it.
So we're between Tampa Bay and the Gulf.
Cool. So how many people do you have in your jurisdiction?
So the population is 1 million, and registered voters, we're about 600,000 registered voters.
A diverse crowd?
So we have Republicans exceed Democrats by maybe 10,000 or so, and Democrats, and then what they call no party affiliation, anybody who's not a Republican or Democrat is a solid good 30. So we have a good, very balanced. We were what they call purple, which is you're a swing. But Pinellas, even though we have more Republicans than Democrats, is still seen as the bellwether county of the state and of the nation. So Pinellas County is
explain the concept of bellwether.
Yeah, so bellwether is amazing because as a political scientist, you want to find the bellwether counties. You want to find where it represents the diversity of the country, whether that's in race, gender, economic, socioeconomic, and you want it to mirror the country. So if you come to Pinellas County, we have picked the President of the United States in all of except 2 presidential elections since Kennedy. So we picked...
So whoever wins in your county
wins the nation.
Tends to win the nation.
Yes. So we are the hub.
So you have a lot of political scientists roaming around trying to study you.
Yes, we do, which makes us
exciting. That's posters.
Yes, it makes it exciting because we're important.
So no pressure, right? Election administration.
Yeah, Florida it comes with its benefits, but it also comes with the pressure. So the benefit is it keeps you sharp. There's no mulligans in elections. So for those of you who like to golf, mulligan is the free shot. You don't get any free shots in elections. It has to be right every single time.
I mean, the whole world, including our part of the world, does know about elections in Florida because of 2000.
Yes.
I mean, we were all glued to the radios, trying to figure out what are these hanging chads and everything.
Yeah.
We studied up on the U.S. elections because of that.
Yes. I'm grateful that we had 2000 because we had to do better. So Florida took 2000, and I have to give mad credit to the legislature for recognizing that 2000 was not good. We didn't have universal procedures. We didn't have laws that made sense. And they at least came out of 2000 with the Election Reform Act of 2001 and completely overhauled the election code. And we just have continuously built on that in Florida. And Florida, to use our governor's words, is the gold standard of conducting elections in the United States. And I'm proud to be a part of Florida elections.
That's when the Help America Vote Act got enacted and then the Election Assistance Commission was put in place. That was all the consequence of 2000, right?
It was. And HAVA Help America Vote Act was created in 2002. And a lot of the things that were in Florida law that changed in 2001 were in HAVA. So Florida did the right thing, which is a good thing when it comes to elections.
And that's something that I spoke about that yesterday at our conference. I think the strength of the democracy is being able to learn the lessons from its own shortcomings. It's about being self-critical. But right now, what I see in the US and in many other places, it's that self-critical is not the only thing. Lots of people come with accusations of fraud and they're election deniers, as you call them here in the US in the media. Is this a big issue for you as an administrator? Is that creating extra pressure?
So coming out of 2020, of course, there's this, sense that there shouldn't be trust in our processes. But as I tell the voters of Pinellas County, you can trust that we conduct fair, accurate, and secure elections, no matter how you vote or in what election you vote in. And I think that there is kind of this very loud minority, and sometimes that squeaky wheel will get grease, and it has gotten some. But I will give, again, some credit to the legislature for, yes, have they listened to some? But they also listen to the administrators who are saying, hey, we hear what you're trying to do. Because with any good conspiracy is a kernel of truth to it. In other words, is there fraud? Sure. I cannot sit back here and say that there's never been fraud in an election.
But then there are humans involved in this process.
No,
I wouldn't call it fraud. I would call it mistakes.
No, there is fraud. I've had to send people who voted twice in an election to the authorities. I've had to send people who have fraudulently completed voter registration applications to the authorities. So there is fraud. Is it to the extent that it has been sold? No. So the kernel of truth is there. It's to the extent in which you are willing to sacrifice access to the process to protect the integrity or under the guise of integrity, which is what we need to protect. So when I go out into the community or I go to legislators and I'm like, this is what we need to think about, is we need to take a moderate approach. We need to be deliberate and evidence-based thinkers. We need to say, we need to protect the access because people who are eligible to vote should have access to voter registration and they should have access to the process. But we also have to protect the integrity of it. And we need to make sure that neither is at the expense of the other.
Our listeners will probably have been laughing the 2 minutes ago when you're saying there is fraud. I had to send a person who voted twice to the authorities. For us, this is like the opposite of fraud. This is when the election administrator took proper action of law enforcing and dealt with the problem. That's for us the opposite of fraud. For us, in our realm, the fraud is when they don't get our votes counted. When you cast your ballot and they don't give a damn about what is in the box. They just put numbers on the sheet of paper. That is what we call fraud. For you, yeah, that fuels some suspicions, but I very much, and I want you guys to understand as well that we very much appreciate the decency with which you approach your processes. If there's somebody that you can trust, that's the election administrators. That's my feel. People go out of their way, yeah? But the circumstances are also interesting right now in the US. This polarization is not only political, it's quite confrontational. People yell at each other, people accuse each other of things. Does this come up during the election period? I mean, election time is when things get nasty sometimes in some places in the world. Is this also the case? I mean, I'm hearing that, violence is a potential threat during the election time. Is that the case?
So to put it into context with other nations, are we there? No. Can any republic or democracy be there? 100%. If you don't watch, if you are not aware of what could be, then of course anything can escalate. We've had threats to our office. I've had threats to me and my staff. You have to keep it into context. You have to know that what you're doing is the right thing. You have to stand behind that. I've had people yelling at me at events, but I know...
Oh, many places election officials get yelled at. It's like...
No, but...
They're public people,
Yeah, and I think that we're gluttons for punishment, and we're a little, if as long as I know that when I wake up every morning and I can go to sleep at night because I know what I'm doing is the right thing to do. Something that I kind of cherish about being an election administrator versus a lawmaker is that I follow law. I don't make it. And I know that as long as I'm doing what I swore an oath to do, I can sleep at night. I can get up the next morning and do it again. So if somebody, and I have to, and I think this is important as an election administrator, you are the closest thing or person between what's going on in that person's world. And so they're angry that their person won or lost, or they're angry because the other person's team won. And they can't vocalize that to a level of the president of the United States.
Well,
they can't vocalize
social
that.
media and vocalize that.
Yeah, but
right?
even so, but if I go if before a group of people, I am the closest thing or person that they can express their feelings of how upset they are about something. And I have to accept
the
that.
first phase of the power
Yes.
that they can interact
100%.
with.
Yes, exactly. And so I have to acknowledge that. They're human beings. I'm not saying that it's appropriate, but I have to accept a level of like, this person is angry. I have to detach from that. This person is angry. I know what we're doing is the right thing. I know that the election results were certified and that they were done accurately and that we followed the law. And if I can stand up there and try to explain the process and I speak with logic and reason and give facts, then I could potentially make an ambassador out of that person where I could maybe change their mind, which we have. I've had people come into our office. We give them tours of the office. We show them the processes. We get down into the weeds. We geek out on stats and get into the law. The people have turned in the sense that they have gone back out and said that I 100% believe that they are doing the right thing and that the election was conducted fairly. And those are our success stories.
It's very interesting because it carries this sense of like, you not only doing a job, you're carrying out a civic duty. You're serving the people in your community, even if they don't absolutely and always appreciate it.
Yes,
Let's put a human face to election administration. How do you feel about like, is this a duty or is it just a job?
No, it is not just a job. You couldn't get up in the mornings and do this day in and day out if it was just a job. You bleed red, white, and blue. This gets in you, and I see this in people that we hire. You either are in this for a career or you're in this, and I can see it just as the person starting, this one's not going to make it. Or I see this energy, I see the spark, I see the love for this, what we do, and that person's going to make it. And when I started this back in 1999 is when I started going into high schools and educating high schoolers about the importance of voting while I was going to college. And then I started full-time with the elections office in 2002. I just knew this is what I loved. And because I love my country, I love what we have. If there's anything that Americans cherish more than they love about anything that you would consider political, is love their right to vote. And you better not take that away. And what I try to instill into our voters is that my office and what we do is we protect their right to vote. We are the people. who do everything we can to make sure that they have access to that process. And we don't care if that political party or this political party wants to interfere with that. We will protect your right to vote. And I think that the voters respect that. They know that. And Americans cherish their liberties.
Normally, I would go to my last question. The one-liner of this podcast is, this is the podcast about why elections still give us hope. I'm not going to ask you that question because you actually just answered that. And I want to wrap up. This was a special episode, an extra one, the 11th for this season. Now in English. Hope you guys all got it. And thank you so much, Julia, because you just gave me the most clear understanding of why elections still give us hope. It's because of the people like you. I've interviewed here Dawn, Eric, Brianna, Bill, Julia, and now more than before, I am convinced that what gives us hope in the elections is the people behind the scenes.